sitting on the curb outside Walgreens when I found him. Not outside my house. Not on a bench in a park. Outside a Walgreens on Route 9, with a duffel bag between his feet and my grandson asleep across his lap, the boy's sneakers dangling over my son's knee, his little mouth open the way it gets when he's really out. My son looked up when he heard my car. He didn't wave. He didn't stand. He just looked at me with that expression I hadn't seen since he was 9 years old, and came home with a bloody nose from a fight he didn't start, and wasn't sure he was allowed to talk about. I put the car in park and got out. "Get in," I said. "Mum. Mom. Pick him up carefully. Don't wake him." He didn't argue. He never argues when I use that voice. 37 years and he still knows better. I opened the back door and he slid in with the boy still sleeping against his chest, and I took the duffel bag and put it in the trunk, and I drove. I didn't ask questions yet. There's a time for questions, and that wasn't it. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember that specifically because I'd been at my book club the night before and we'd argue for 2 hours about a novel none of us had actually finished reading, and I'd driven home laughing about it, thinking what a good week it was turning out to be. That was Monday. By Tuesday at 6:48 in the evening, I was driving my son and his 4-year-old away from a Walgreens parking lot with one duffel bag between them. Let me tell you a little about myself before I go further, because it matters for what comes next. My name is June. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a licensed CPA, and the last 11 of those as a senior financial compliance officer at a regional bank in New Jersey. I retired 2 years ago, which everyone assumed meant I was going to start gardening and watch my stories. Instead, I started doing pro bono financial counseling for a women's shelter 3 days a week, and I read everything I can get my hands on about elder law and tenant rights, because I like knowing things. I always have. My husband passed 8 years ago. Lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life. My son is the younger of my 2 children. His name is Kevin. He is a good man. Not a perfect man, but a good one, and I say that not because he's mine, but because I've watched him become one over the years, slowly, the way good things usually happen. He married Yvette when he was 29. She was 27. I liked her. I want to say that clearly because the rest of this story might make it sound like I didn't, and that's not true. I liked her. She was sharp and funny, and she loved Kevin in the way that makes you feel settled, not anxious. But Yvette's brother was another matter entirely. His name is Ray. He's 4 years older than Yvette, never married, works in some kind of property management company that I could never get a straight answer about. The kind of man who enters a room and immediately starts explaining things to people who didn't ask. The kind who shakes your hand too firmly and calls you young lady, when you are clearly neither young nor a lady in the sense he means it. Kevin and Yvette had been struggling for about 18 months by the time this happened. Not fighting, not dramatic. Just the slow drift that happens to some couples when life piles up and they stop rowing in the same direction. Kevin had told me a few months earlier that they were seeing a counselor. I told him that was brave. I meant it. What I didn't know was that Ray had been involved the whole time. Ray had helped them find the apartment they were living in, a 2-bedroom in a complex in Metchu. Decent place, good school district for when the time came, nice little balcony. The lease was in Yvette's name only, which I later learned was because Kevin's credit had a late payment issue from a few years back, and they hadn't wanted to deal with the paperwork. At the time it seemed like a practical decision. It became a weapon. Here's what happened as I pieced it together over the next several days. Yvette had decided she wanted to end the marriage. I don't fault her for that. When a marriage is over, it's over. And no amount of counseling changes that if one person has already left in their heart. What I do fault is how it was handled. Ray had apparently spent several weeks coaching her, telling her that because the lease was in her name alone, she had the legal right to remove Kevin from the apartment at any time. Telling her that if she gave Kevin a certain number of days' notice, and here he'd gotten sloppy with the details, she could essentially lock him out. Telling her that Kevin had no claim to anything in that apartment because his name wasn't on anything. That last part was not entirely false, but it wasn't entirely true either, and the difference matters. On a Tuesday morning, while Kevin was at work, and my grandson was at his little preschool program, Ray showed up with two men and moved everything that could be identified as Kevin's into the hallway, not onto the street, into the hallway of the building, which he apparently believed made it legal. Then Yvette changed the locks. Kevin got the call from a neighbor at 4 in the afternoon. The neighbor, a retired teacher named, I'm getting ahead of myself. The neighbor called him. Kevin left work early, picked up my grandson from preschool, and spent 2 hours sitting in that Walgreens parking lot because he couldn't think of what else to do. He called his friend first. His friend wasn't home. He called his co-worker. His co-worker offered a couch, but Kevin didn't want to take the boy to a couch. He called me last because he said, and I quote, I didn't want to worry you. He is 37 years old, and he didn't want to worry me. I was in my kitchen reheating soup when my phone rang. He told me where he was. I turned off the stove, got my keys, and I was in that parking lot in 22 minutes. That night, after Kevin got the boy settled in my guest room and I'd found the spare pillow and the nightlight that my grandson still needs even at 4 years old, Kevin sat down at my kitchen table and we talked. He was quiet for a long time first, just sat there with his hands around a mug of decaf, not drinking it. I let him be quiet. I know my son. The words come when they're ready. She had every right to end it, he finally said. Yes, I said. She did. I just don't know how. He stopped, started again. I don't know how this is legal. I've been in that apartment for 3 years. I paid half of everything. I have my name on nothing. I looked at him across my kitchen table and I felt something settle in me. Not anger. Not yet. Something more like clarity. The kind that comes when a problem stops being emotional and becomes, instead, a question you know how to answer. Do you have bank records? I said. He looked up. What? 3 years of rent payments. Did you pay from a joint account? Your own account? Venmo? How did you pay your half? He thought about it. Joint account mostly, for the first 2 years. Then we closed it and I was paying Yvette directly. Zelle. Do you have those records? I mean, they're on my phone, my bank app. All of them? He started scrolling. Yeah, they're all here. Every month. I nodded. What about utilities? Electric was in my name. I paid it directly. Internet? Also me. I folded my hands on the table. Kevin, what Ray told Yvette is not entirely wrong. Her name is on the lease. That does give her legal standing as the primary tenant. But what Ray doesn't understand, or chose not to mention, is that cohabitation law in New Jersey does not work quite the way he seems to think it does. Kevin looked at me the way he used to look at me when I'd explain his math homework. You have contributed financially to that household for 3 years, I said. You have documentation of every payment. Your name is on utility accounts. You have established what the law calls equitable interest in that tenancy. She cannot simply change the locks and declare you removed. There is a process, and Ray skipped it. So what does that mean? It means, I said, that what happened today was not legal. It means that before this goes any further, we need to make some calls. I want to be clear about something. I am not a lawyer. I have never claimed to be a lawyer. What I am is a woman who spent 31 years working in financial compliance, which means I have spent 31 years reading contracts, understanding what language means and what it doesn't mean, knowing exactly where the line is between what someone tells you the rules are and what the rules actually say. And I know how to find the right people. I called a friend the next morning. I'd known Roberta since our kids were in elementary school together. She went a different direction than me and became a real estate attorney. She's semi-retired now, but she still takes cases that interest her. I told her the short version. She was quiet for a moment. Tell your son not to remove any of his belongings from that hallway without documentation, she said. And tell him not to communicate directly with Yvette or her brother right now. I'll reach out to her attorney if she has one. She may not have retained one yet, I said. Even better, Robert said. That means Ray has been operating without any actual legal advice, which means there are probably several things we can address fairly quickly. I called Kevin in from the backyard, where he was pushing my grandson on the old swing set that's been there since Kevin was small. He came in, still wearing his jacket, and I could see he hadn't slept well. The circles under his eyes. The way he was holding his shoulders up near his ears. Roberta's going to help, I said. You need to get me every financial record you have going back to when you moved in. Bank statements, Zelle history, anything with your name and that address. Utility bills, renter's insurance if you had it. I did. I paid the renter's insurance. Even better, get me everything. He sat down. He looked at the table. Then he looked up at me. Mum, how are you doing this? Doing what? Not panicking. I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer is that I was not calm on the inside. I was furious, actually. Not at Yvette. I understood Yvette, even if I didn't agree with her choices. I was furious at Ray, at the smug confidence of a man who had done his research just carelessly enough to think he knew what he was doing, who had spent weeks feeding my daughter-in-law legal-sounding information to move her toward an action that was not as clean as he told her it was. But panic doesn't help anything. I learned that a long time ago. Panic is what happens when you forget that most problems, even the bad ones, have a next step. And as long as there's a next step, you don't panic. You take the step. Panic doesn't help, I said. Let's get organized. Over the next 3 days, I sat at my kitchen table with Kevin's phone and my laptop, and I built a document. 37 months of rent contributions. The electric bills with his name on them. 4 years of renter's insurance, paid by his account. The Zelle transfers, every single one, going back 26 months. The picture it painted was very clear. My son had financially co-maintained that apartment for its entire duration. He had done so consistently, on time, without fail. His name was not on the lease, but his name was on everything else. Roberta had made a call to Yvette's family, not directly to Yvette, but to a cousin who acted as a family intermediary, and the message that came back was that Ray had told them everything was handled, that Kevin had abandoned the apartment, which was why his things were in the hallway, that there was nothing legally actionable. When Roberta received that message, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, then they want to do it this way. I won't go into the specific legal language because it gets complicated, and that's not really the point of what I'm telling you. What I will say is this. Within 10 days, Roberta had sent a formal notice to Yvette's address, certified mail, return receipt, outlining Kevin's established financial tenancy, the improper lockout, and the specific New Jersey statutes that govern unauthorized tenant removal. The notice made clear that Kevin was not seeking to contest the divorce or dispute Yvette's right to the apartment long-term. He was simply establishing, in writing, with documentation, that what had occurred on that Tuesday was not legal, and that he would be pursuing appropriate remedy unless the matter was resolved. The notice also included a separate section, very politely worded, that I had drafted myself. It outlined the 3 years of joint financial contribution to the household and requested an accounting of certain shared assets. Specifically, a joint savings account that Kevin had mentioned in passing, one that had been closed without his knowledge, 8 months before the separation. That part was new to Yvette. She hadn't known Kevin knew about it. Ray called Kevin the next day. Kevin didn't answer. I had told him not to. Ray called again. Kevin didn't answer. Ray called me. I answered on the second ring. June. He used my name like he was doing me a favor by knowing it. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Ray, I said pleasantly, I'm going to stop you there. I've asked Kevin not to communicate directly right now, and I'd ask you to extend that same courtesy. If you have concerns about the notice, please direct them to Roberta. I gave him the name of Roberta's firm. She's handling things from here. There was a pause. I don't think you understand what you're getting involved in, he said. I thought about my 31 years of financial compliance work. I thought about the document I built on my kitchen table. I thought about my son's face in that Walgreens parking lot and my grandson's sneakers dangling over his knee. I think, I said, that you and I might have different assessments of that. Then I said goodbye and hung up. Ray did not call back. What happened after that took about 6 weeks to fully resolve, and most of it was Roberta doing what Roberta does, which is to say, quietly and thoroughly dismantling every assumption that Ray had built Yvette's plan on. The lockout was addressed first. Kevin was permitted back into the apartment to retrieve his belongings properly, not from a hallway, but from inside, with documentation of everything he removed. He didn't fight for the furniture or the dishes or any of it. He took his clothes, his files, his grandmother's clock that had been sitting on the bookshelf since we gave it to him as a housewarming gift, and his son's things. He did not make it a battle. I was proud of him for that. The closed savings account was more complicated and took longer, but the short version is that it had held a little over $11,000 at the time it was closed, money that had come from both of their paychecks, and that Kevin was entitled to half. After some back and forth, he received a check for $5,500. Not a fortune, but it was his, and getting it meant that Ray's version of events, that Kevin had nothing and no claim, was formally and financially proven wrong. The divorce itself was a separate matter, and I wasn't involved in that. Kevin had his own attorney for that process, a woman from a firm in Woodbridge that Roberta recommended. It was not contentious in the end. Yvette was not a bad person. She had listened to her brother and made some poor decisions under his influence, and once the legal pieces were clear, she was, from what Kevin told me, relatively cooperative. My grandson, whose name is Miles, and who has his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness, spent 3 months living in my guest room with Kevin. 3 months of breakfast at my kitchen table and cartoons in my living room and small sneakers at my back door. I will not pretend that was all bad. There was a morning in November when Miles woke up before both of us, and I found him in the kitchen, standing on his step stool at the counter, very seriously trying to make himself cereal, the box of Cheerios open and half of them on the floor. He looked up at me. "I was hungry," he said. "I see that," I said. "I made us both eggs." Kevin found an apartment in January, a 2-bedroom in the same school district, lease in his name, everything documented properly from day one. Roberta reviewed it before he signed. The day he got the keys, he came by my house and sat at my kitchen table one more time, and I made coffee, and we didn't say very much. "I don't know how to thank you," he finally said. "You don't need to." "No, I mean—" He stopped, looked at his hands. "I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think of anything I could actually do. And then I called you, and an hour later you were already 3 steps ahead." I looked at my son, this man who had once been 9 years old with a bloody nose, who had grown into someone patient and steady and good, sitting in my kitchen looking a little hollowed out but still there. "You called the right person," I said. He smiled at that. Just a little. "Here is what I want to say to you. If you are watching this and you recognize something in what I've described, it doesn't have to be a lockout. It doesn't have to be a lease. It might be something else entirely. A situation where someone has told you or told the person you love that the rules are the rules and there's nothing to be done, that the paperwork is the paperwork, that names are names, and if your name isn't on something, then you have no standing. Sometimes that is true. I won't pretend it's never true. But sometimes, more often than people know, the person saying that has done just enough research to be confident and not quite enough to be right. The most important thing I did was not legal knowledge. It was documentation. It was sitting down at a kitchen table and building a clear picture of the truth, one bank statement at a time. Most situations like this one have more paper behind them than either side realizes. Find the paper. Find someone who knows how to read it. And if you're in the middle of something right now, a lease issue, a housing situation, a dispute where someone is telling you what you have and don't have, please leave me a comment. I read them. I may not be able to give you specific legal advice, but I can tell you what questions to ask and what kind of professional to look for. Because the most expensive mistake people make in these situations is believing they have no options before they've actually checked. You may have more than you think. I still think about that image sometimes. My son on a curb outside a Walgreens, a duffel bag at his feet. My grandson asleep across his lap. Not because it was the worst thing I've ever seen, it wasn't, but because of what it represented. A man who had done everything right, paid every bill, showed up every month, and still found himself with nothing to show for it because his name wasn't on a single piece of paper. That's the thing about consequences. They don't always fall on the person who deserves them. Sometimes they land on the person who trusted too much, documented too little, and assumed that doing the right thing would be enough. Kevin was not careless or dishonest. He was just someone who believed the arrangement was fair, and so he never thought to protect himself from the day it might not be. Ray, on the other hand, had done just enough research to feel powerful. He walked into that situation with half a blueprint and the confidence of someone who had never been seriously tested. He told his sister things that sounded like legal fact and weren't. He moved quickly, acted decisively, and was completely certain he had covered everything. That certainty was his undoing, because when you act on incomplete information with total confidence, you don't leave yourself any room to course correct. You commit to the wrong position, and then you're stuck defending it. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's true and because I've watched it happen enough times in my professional life to recognize the pattern. Corners cut quietly rarely stay quiet. What carried us through those 6 weeks wasn't anything dramatic. It was just steadiness. It was Kevin sitting at my kitchen table night after night, pulling up records on his phone, not giving in to the urge to call a veto and argue, not letting the anger make his decisions for him. That takes something. It takes a kind of character that doesn't get talked about enough, the willingness to do the slow, unglamorous work when everything in you wants to react. Kevin had that. I was proud of it. And knowledge mattered, not expertise. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a lawyer. What I had was 30 years of reading carefully, asking questions, and understanding that most situations have more structure to them than they first appear. That's available to anyone. It just requires the willingness to sit down and look. Miles ate Cheerios off my kitchen floor that November morning and looked up at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. He had no idea what the adults in his life were navigating. He just knew he was hungry and that his grandmother was there. Children have a way of cutting straight through everything and reminding you what you're actually working for. Kevin has his own apartment now. The lease is in his name. Everything is documented. He's going to be okay. And I think that's the only ending that matters. Not that Ray was wrong, not that the paperwork won, but that my son walked out of something that was designed to leave him with nothing, and he walked out with his integrity intact and his boy beside him. That's what I want people to take from this. Do the right thing, yes, but also write it down.